Thank you. We are in the end times, folks. And there have been a lot of people out there that have been screaming from the rooftops, and in some cases, their words have been falling on deaf ears. But you know, more and more ears are gaining their hearing back. And one of the men who has been screaming from the rooftops for quite some time, I've had the pleasure of meeting on a couple of occasions, and his message and his words become stronger and more powerful. And I'm sure that he needs no introduction. So with great pleasure and honor, I bring to this humble stage Mr. Lindsey Williams.
This has been a wonderful conference. It's all because of Pastor Butch Paul that you're here and I'm here. I think we ought to do something special for him this afternoon, don't you? This one man who God has used so much on Call to Decision has allowed me on his radio program many times. It's all because of what God has done through him. I think we ought to give him a standing ovation and a big applause, don't you, Brother Butch? Someone asked me the other day, don't you think it's time to brush down the cobwebs and start all over again? I said, brush down the cobwebs. I think it's time to kill the spider. Today, you're going to hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I hope you'll go away from here knowing the rest of the story. I hope you have a pencil and paper. I'd like you to write down one statement that will summarize everything I'm going to say today. Here it is. The standard currency of the world is oil. It's not the dollar, neither is it the euro, nor is it the ruble. It is oil. And that's the subject I'd like to deal with today because it all began with me back in 1970. I was a missionary in the state of Alaska. I'd been a Baptist pastor for over 12 years. I went to Alaska as a missionary, and I heard they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. 800 miles, 4-foot diameter pipe, transversing the state of Alaska from the huge oil find up on the Arctic Ocean at Prudhoe Bay to Valdez, Alaska. I said, pipeline, and then I heard 25,000 pipeliners. What would be the first thing that would come to your mind if you were a missionary and heard that there were going to be 25,000 of the most cussingest, drinkingest, onerous folks on the face of the earth that were coming to your state to build a pipeline? Well, that's exactly what I thought. They must need some spiritual guidance. So I went to Alaska Pipeline Service Company and I said, don't you need a chaplain on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline? They said, we never had a chaplain on any pipeline in the world. We wouldn't know what to do with you. I said, no problem. Well, they didn't like the idea much. I kept going back and back and back. Persistence paid off. The Holy Spirit worked on them. And finally they said, okay, we'll give you the northern 7 camps, including the huge oil find at Prudhoe Bay. And they said, go up there and see what you can do. I did. About 6 months later, Mr. R.H. King, personnel relations man with Alaska, came to me and he said, Chaplain, we didn't realize just how much value you would be to us. You're saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees that we aren't having to pay because your religious denomination pays you. He said, we would like to offer you executive status. I said, well, what does that mean? He said, you can go any place you'd like to, see anything you want to see. We'll give you an executive pass. You can live in the dorms with the executives. And he said, we would like to offer you to come into our business meetings in an advisory capacity in order to help the relationship between management and labor. For 3 years' time, I lived in the dorms with, sat across the table from those whom you only hear about in the IMF and the World Bank, ones that most authors would give anything to have even rubbed shoulders with one time, and I lived with them for 3 years' time. I heard things that changed my life. If someone had asked me in 1970, Lindsey Williams, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who control the world? I would have said, who are you, a John Bircher? If someone had asked me in 1980, after my book Energy Non-Crisis was written, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who tell the president what to do, dictate to Congress what bills to pass, tell the OPEC nations what price they're going to give them for a barrel of oil on any given day, I would have said, not only do I believe it, I sat and listened to them talk about it. For 3 years' time, I had the privilege of rubbing shoulders with these people. I shall never forget one night, I went back to my dorm room. I'd been with them all day long. I was sitting across the table at breakfast from the International Secretary-Treasurer of Exxon. I remember that afternoon I'd helped to host some congressman from Washington, and that night had been with Mr. Ken Fromm eating dinner, who was a senior executive with Atlantic Richfield. And I went back to my dorm room that night. Keep in mind, I had rubbed shoulders with honest people for the past 15 years. Deacons, church members, decent folks. And here all of a sudden, I'm thrown into the midst of a den of thieves, literally the power brokers of the world. And I went to my dorm room that night. I laid down on my bed. I looked up at the ceiling, and I literally cried out to God. And I said, oh God, how can there be such dastardly people on the face of this earth that by design plan and intentionally control nations? I decided there was some time for someone to see this bigger than me. I knew they would never believe a little insignificant Baptist missionary that was there working out in the bush of Alaska, and I invited Senator Hugh Chance. He writes the foreword to my book, The Energy Non-Crisis, stating the following. You see, Senator Chance had been a friend of mine for some time. He was a senator from the state of Colorado. And I called him and I said, Hugh, if I make the arrangements, will you come to Alaska? I'd like you to spend a week with me on the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. He said, Lindsey, I'll be glad to. I said, Hugh, it's going to be unbelievable what you're going to see. He did. I made the arrangements with ARCO and with BP, the producers of the east and the west side of the field. He came to Alaska. He asked questions. They showed him everything he asked. They never one time refused answering his questions. They showed him a mock-up of the field. They gave him the perforations of the pipe. They told him the analysis of the oil. All week long, Hugh went from one place to the other, Hugh Chance. And I remember the last day before he went back to Colorado, he got me off in my dorm room and he said, Lindsey, I can hardly believe what I've seen and heard today. And I said, Hugh, what do you mean? He said, Lindsey, I was sitting in the Senate of the state of Colorado when the men came from Washington to brief us as to why there'd been lines at the gas pump and why there was a supposed energy crisis. But he said, Lindsey, I have come to realize, for what I have seen here this week on this pipeline at Prudhoe Bay, that almost everything that I was told in the Senate of the state of Colorado by the men from Washington, D.C., as I sat there in that federal briefing, I've come to realize that almost everything that I was told was the exact opposite of the truth. He said, Lindsey, I was intentionally lied to and misbriefed by the men from Washington, D.C. from a federal level. Everything that happens in the world is by design. I learned that there is no such thing as by chance. They have an agenda. I heard them talk about a 30-year plan for the Arabs. They have carried it out meticulously, exactly as I heard them tell it. Everything that's taking place today, I knew it 25 years ago. I begged people for 25 to 30 years to listen to me. Finally, since the price of gasoline has reached $3 a gallon in most of the country is beginning to wake up, and talk show hosts call I'm doing talk shows almost daily, and sometimes numbers per day, because you see the most touchy part of anybody's anatomy is the rear pocket. But for some reason, the Americans have finally decided it was time to wake up, because it's touching their food table now. After all, what are you going to do in order to pay $3 a gallon when you must drive back and forth to work? You have to take food off the table in order to put it in the gas tank so it runs out the exhaust pipe, and you have nothing to show for it. And it's all according to the design plan of the very people that I sat in the board meetings with 25 years ago. I shall never forget that morning. I walked into Arco Base. Standing at the door was Mr. Jim Lawler. He was the equipments man for Atlantic Richfield. He said, "Lindsey, would you like to see something exciting today?" I said, "Jim, I'm always in for excitement. What do you mean?" He said, "Get in the pickup truck and let's go out to West Dock. That's where the big flotilla came in every year to supply the buildings and the equipment and so on for Prudhoe Bay." And as we drove along, he said, "Lindsey, this is what I think we're going to see today." He said, "We think we have just drilled into a monstrous pool of oil." He said, "Do you remember where Gull Island is? About 2 to 3 miles out in the Arctic Ocean. You could see the drill rig sticking up above the horizon." And he said, "Lindsey, we are going to release some oil from that pool today. We're going to check the pressure of the field and the chemical analysis of the oil." And he said, and it's about that time we arrived. In a few moments, a big plume of smoke went up into the sky. That was back in the days when they still allowed them to burn off. And as he stood there, the more he watched, the more excited he became. And finally he said, "Get back in the truck. Let's go to Arco Base. I want to see what's coming in from out at the drill site." We arrived back at Arco Base Camp, walked up to the second floor. I'll never forget it. I walked into Mr. Ken Fromm's office. He was a senior executive with Atlantic Richfield on duty that week. And as we walked into his office, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Standing around the table in Ken Fromm's office was the top 8 oil company men of the world. The top of Exxon and others of the oil companies and BP and others. And as I was watching, I saw they were excited. I've never seen such excitement amongst oil men. And finally, Mr. Ken Fromm looked up at me. I'll never understand why I was invited into that room. Why they ever allowed me in as chaplain, I'll never know. But finally, Mr. Ken Fromm looked up at me and he said, "Lindsey, we've just done it." I said, "Ken, you've just done what?" He said, "We have just discovered the largest pool of oil in North America." He said, "It may very well be the largest pool of oil on the face of the earth." He said, "America, as of this day, is energy independent." I said, "Ken, what does this mean?" He said, "It should be headlines on every newspaper in America tomorrow morning. America energy independent. We don't need any more Arab oil. We have the oil on our own soil. We can provide for our own people. We can bring the price of gasoline down." You can imagine my response. The next morning, the first thing I wanted to do was get up early and head back to Arco Base and see the headlines coming in off of on Wien Airlines' first flight from the Anchorage newspaper. And I arrived early that morning. I walked into base camp. I'd hardly gotten there good, and the security guard caught me at the door. I said good morning to him, and he said, "Chaplain Williams, go right up to Mr. Ken Fromm's office and you sit down." He said, "Don't you even talk to me." I said, "What's wrong? Have I done something?" He said, "Don't ask me any questions. Just go up there and sit down in Mr. Ken Fromm's office." I did. In a few moments he came in, closed the door, walked around the desk, looked up at me and said, "Chaplain, I think I'd be a little careful if I were you about what you heard yesterday." He said, "That pool of oil will not be released to the American public anytime soon. The information has just been classified." He said, "Be careful what you say." When my book, Energy Non-Crisis, came out in 1980, I dared to write the story of Gull Island and what I saw that day. It was only about 2 to 3 months later, I received a call on the phone one day, and who do you think it was? Mr. Ken Fromm. He was angry. Oh, he was upset. I don't think I've ever heard an oil man quite so mad. He was using every word you could imagine that sailors might use, much less oil men. And I said, "Ken, what's wrong?" He said, "Lindsey, Atlantic Richfield just fired me." I said, "What? You're a career man. You're the lead man at Prudhoe Bay." I said, "They can't do that to you." I said, "You're just a few years away from retirement." He said, "But Lindsey, they did." And I said, "Why?" He said, "They found out that I was the one that allowed you in that room that day, and you saw what happened at Gull Island." And he said, "As a result, I'm fired." And he said, "Lindsey, I'm so angry." He said, now, in your book, The Energy Non-Crisis, there are a few things in that book that are not letter perfect. He said, you're not an oil patch man. He said, you're a minister. He said, would you allow me to rewrite that book for you so that they can never question anything you've said? Well, we did. We sat down for about a month. Ken Fromm completely rewrote my book, Energy Non-Crisis. It is letter perfect, written by the senior executive of Atlantic Richfield himself. They have never been able to question this book, not one word of it. And what did he do? He put in a chapter that I had not put there. He wrote it himself. It's entitled, If Gull Island Doesn't Blow Your Mind, This Will. And believe you me, it has almost blown the mind of the Department of Energy that anyone would ever dare tell the story of how gasoline could be one half the price that it is today. That America doesn't need the Arabs anymore. Even the perforations of the pipe, the chemical analysis of the oil, everything is there. Letter perfect. They could never doubt what was said. Then my new, updated, and enlarged edition of the Energy Non-Crisis came out. Who do you think I got a call from then? You guessed it, Ken Fromm. It was about 2 or 3 months later after the book came out, the new edition. And on the other end of the line, he said, well, Lindsey, I'm glad I helped you rewrite your book when you did. He said, I've just been hired back by Atlantic Richfield. They've given me a large increase in salary. They've promised me a phenomenal retirement. They've told me that there's just one thing that I can't do. I cannot any longer give you any information. I said, but Ken, I'm glad that you did when you did. 1984. You wonder the control of these people? This story will explain it quite readily. 1984, I was sitting at my home in Kasilof, Alaska. A phone call. Who happened to be on the other end of the line? Yes, none other than Mr. Ken Fromm. Now, he was feeling good that day. You know, even these men, no matter how big they get, no matter how tall in the world that they become, no matter how rich they get, they still put on their britches just like I do every morning. And they still have a streak of pride and arrogance in them. And that day, Ken said, Lindsey, how you doing? I said, fine. Appreciate you writing that chapter in my book and rewording it, making it letter perfect. He said, well, Lindsey, he said, he knew I was a Christian. He said, how would you like to be considered a prophet? I said, well, Ken, I appreciate the thought, but how is that? He said, well, do you have any speaking engagements you're going on anytime soon? I said, yes. I'm going to be lecturing beginning in Seattle, Washington next week, and finally about 2 or 3 months later wind up in Southern California, speaking almost every day. He said, well, Lindsey, every place you go, would you tell people that the price of crude oil is going from $32 a barrel? You remember when that was? I mean, $32 a barrel. We thought it couldn't get any higher. The world would collapse if crude oil ever got over $32 a barrel. He said, Lindsey, tell your audiences, now note the date. Note it very carefully. 1984, because this is very significant as to the rest of the story as you see it unfold. And Ken said, the price of oil is going from $32 a barrel to $10 a barrel. I kind of hesitated for a moment and I said, but Ken, you can't do that. I said, the Arab world's economy will collapse. He very quietly said on the phone, now come on, Lindsey, get off of it. You sat in our board meetings. You know who controls the price of a barrel of crude oil. He said, don't you know that OPEC has nothing to do with the price of a barrel of oil? They just think they do. I said, but Ken, if you carry a barrel of oil to $10 a barrel, it's going to collapse the sheikhs and the sheiks. I said, they have kept these people in a socialistic society. They give them everything. They give them medical care. They give them free education. They give them everything. They're holding the people under them. The sheikhs and sheiks that were nothing but nomads roaming the deserts, riding camels as of 20 years ago, are now living in their gold-lined palaces and swimming pools that are lined with gold. I said, they're wealthy. I said, you can't collapse those economies like this. He said, but Lindsey, you do know who does it, don't you? And I said, sad to say, Ken, but I do. I went to Seattle, Washington the following week. My audiences, when I would say the price of crude oil is going to $10 a barrel, I actually had people to break out laughing in my audiences. They thought I was crazy. They likewise knew it couldn't happen. Well, it didn't go to $10 a barrel. It went to $11 a barrel. They got it pretty close. And what happened? You remember. Now, wait a minute. Go back in your mind. Think a moment. 1980. What was the price of gold? Come on. $800 plus an ounce. This, watch it now. Watch your dates. This is 1984 that Ken Fromm is talking with me on the telephone, and he said, Lindsey, oil's going from $32 a barrel to $10 a barrel. It went to 11. The sheikhs and sheiks, in order to keep their people hostage under them and maintain their economies, after all, they'd been told back in 1980 when they were becoming wealthy overnight, they'd been told by their leaders, their bankers, their international financiers, whom they trusted because, after all, they didn't know international finance. They had not learned it the hard way yet. And back in 1980, they had bought gold because they were told to by those who had made them rich. They were told, buy gold, buy gold, buy gold. They bought it at $800 an ounce by the train carload. Watch, folks. You must understand the control factor. The name of the game is control. Nothing happens by chance. There is a design plan out there. They know what they're doing, and they know exactly what they intend to do for you. They have an agenda. You and I may not have an agenda, but they do, and they know exactly where they're going. And by the providence of God only, I sat there and listened to what they said they were going to do over the next 30 years, and they've carried it out perfectly. And they did this time with the Arabs because they had sold them train car loads of gold at $800 an ounce. 4 years later, they took the price of oil from $32 a barrel to $11 a barrel, and the Arabs had to sell, and all the oil-producing countries of the world that had fallen prey to them at that time had to sell their gold back to the very people they had bought it from. But in 1984, what had they taken the price of gold to? $300 approximately an ounce. What did they sell it back to those very people they'd bought it from for? $300 an ounce. What did they bought it for? $800 an ounce. I knew it 3 months in advance. And if you don't believe me, ask my audiences as I traveled down the coastline from Seattle to Southern California. My audiences laughed at me. And when it went to $11 a barrel, my phone almost rang off the hook. They said, "You're a prophet." I said, "I'm not a prophet. I sat in the board meetings with the people who did it. And I knew 3 months in advance they were going to do it." You think they don't control the world? They know exactly what they're doing, and nothing happens by chance. You see, my books are different. By the grace of God, I've been able to write 6 of them. None of my books are the same as any other books you'll ever see. You'll never find a glossary in my books. You know why? I don't refer to anybody else's material. I didn't go and research somebody else's books and write mine. My books are written from what I lived. I was there. I saw them. And I know they are there. They are for real. And don't you ever doubt for one moment that there are a handful of people who control the world. And before this session is over this afternoon, I will tell you who they are. But first, oh, you think I'm joking with you? I'm going to step out on a limb this afternoon. I've said some things just lately that I've never said before because I am so concerned for my country that I love. And I've decided that no matter what it takes, I must tell the truth and tell things I wasn't willing to tell 6 months ago. Here is one. You've heard of peak oil? You believe it? The Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline initially flowed oil in 1977. That year, the pipeline flowed 1.7 million barrels of oil every 24 hours. I'm glad to see some of you writing. You'll put these notes together. Some of you have seen a few pieces of the puzzle. This afternoon, when you see the total picture of the puzzle, you're going to go from this place a changed person, because now you're going to see the total picture worldwide. That pipeline flowed in 77, 1.4 million barrels of oil per day. The field at Prudhoe Bay had 1,500 pounds of natural artesian pressure. And that year, the ecologist, I even have it in print in some of the magazines, the ecologist came out and said, 20 years and the Prudhoe Bay oil field will be depleted and there'll be no more up here and it'll give out. This is 30 years. The field is now flowing 1.4 million barrels of oil every 24 hours. It still has 1,500 pounds of natural artesian pressure, and they're saying it could go for another 200 years. Why? There's no such thing. The field has replenished itself. It's coming from somewhere way down deep in the earth. They tell you peak oil for the purpose of taking the price where they want it. There's enough natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska to supply the entire United States of America for over 200 years if every other natural gas well in America were cut off tomorrow morning. Every 24 hours at Prudhoe Bay, 1 billion, and you heard me correctly, not million, 1 billion cubic feet of natural gas are being pumped back into the ground that come up with the oil. They're using 48 747 type jet aircraft engines. That's how much it takes to be able to pump that natural gas back into the ground, all because the government of the United States of America would not allow them to build a natural gas pipeline down the same corridor as the crude oil pipeline. Create what is necessary for your homes. Generate electricity, the cleanest method of generating electricity on the face of this earth with no pollution whatsoever to the ecology is the natural gas. They do not want you to have it. The Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline corridor was built to accommodate 3 pipelines. They built one and the government said, you do not build anymore. Why? They don't want you to have the natural gas from the North Slope of Alaska. Listen to the governor of the state of Alaska. He stated on the Bill Mayer TV show entitled Real Time on March the 18th, 2005, quote, there is potentially enough crude oil on the North Slope of Alaska to supply the United States of America for over 200 years. He is correct. Gasoline will be, mark my words, you're going to say that this conference today and what I'm saying, 6 months from now, you're going to say it's prophetic. And if you happen to call my office, I'm going to say, no, it's not. I know the people who are doing it. Mark my words, you are going to pay $5 a gallon at the gas pump in the very near future. Get ready. Prepare your household. It is going to happen. It could very well go to $100 a barrel in no time. Listen, if you will, to Oliver Morgan and Heather Stewart, both senior Wall Street analysts. They said just last week, a single political shock could be enough to send the oil market into panic. In the early 1960s, here is where I begin some facts that only could have been heard as I sat in the board meetings with those that you only read about and most authors wish they could rub shoulders with. So for what it's worth, please take it at face value, because you'll never hear it probably from any other place. In the early 1960s, crude oil was chosen as a method of controlling the world. There's one thing that touches the life of every human being, I care not who they are. Whether it be the rich, affluent American, or whether it be the person living in the third world country in a cardboard shack, there's one thing that touches the life of every human being on the face of this earth. That's crude oil. There's nothing else that could have been chosen as a method of controlling the world, and that's the reason they chose it in the early 60s. The toothbrush that you'll use tonight to brush your teeth, it's made out of plastic, comes from crude oil. The plastic bag in your garbage can at home comes from crude oil. The asphalt highway that you drove here on, it's made from crude oil. The polyester clothing you're wearing as you're sitting here in this audience, it's made from crude oil. The drugs at the drugstore, it's made from crude oil. The gasoline at the gas pump, it came from crude oil. You ready for the next statement? I don't have time to repeat my statements, so write them down as I say them, please. I'm going to try to get everything into an hour and 15 minutes and keep my time this afternoon, but it's going to be difficult. What you pay at the gas pump is a form of taxation. To whom? Now, if Internal Revenue came along and said, we're going to tax a tax on you, an extra tax you've never seen before, such as this tax is being taxed on, you'd rise up in arms. But you'll pay it at the gas pump. Who are you going to pay it to? Who is they? You see, this is what you don't know. You've been told to blame the big oil companies. I'm not taking up for them. They made all-time record profits. I never received one penny. I may as well clarify myself here. I never received one penny from the oil companies. I was paid by my religious denomination as a missionary. I have no reason whatsoever to take up for the oil companies. You've been told that the oil companies are the big bad villains. Well, they sure are. You say they're receiving all-time record profits. Yes, they are. You say they're making money like they've never made it before. They are, but there's somebody that's making more than they are. Do you know who they are? I know what you want me to do. You're expecting me to get ethnic at this point, aren't you? Well, I'm not going to. I'm going to fool you. I'm going to tell you the truth. As I saw it, as I sat in their board meetings and listened to them talk, and I'm going to tell you who sat across the tables from me and who were in those board meetings. You are blaming the wrong people when you blame the oil companies only. There's someone making more than they're making. There's something you need to learn. I beg of you, learn how to listen to their buzzwords. When you learn their buzzwords, you'll learn everything they're thinking. And I had an opportunity to analyze these people for 3 years' time. And one of the first things I learned was they tell you everything they're going to do if you know how to listen to what they're saying. But the average American does not know how to listen to what they're telling you. Remember when Mr. George Bush Sr. was President of the United States of America? He used to use the expression, 1,000 points of light. A kinder and gentler world. You remember his expression, new world order? Did you know what he was talking about? If you had, you would have known what he was saying. I was watching not too long ago, Good Morning America. I very seldom ever watch the news because I usually know what's going to be ahead of time. And I was watching Good Morning America that morning, and who do you think they were interviewing? George Bush Sr., our president of a number of administrations ago. And he was just as suave as he ever was and doing a marvelous job that day. I was listening for every little buzzword because he always had a way of telling everything he was thinking, even if he wasn't supposed to. You remember. And as I watched the news that day, the person that was interviewing him said, Mr. Bush, being that you're on Good Morning America today, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you personally ever watch the morning news? He looked over at the individual just as nonchalant as could be. Remember the day he was up on the platform and he put his watch up like this, and you remember that. All these things, they were all buzzwords, they were all signs. And he looked back at the person that was interviewing him and he said, no, I don't watch the morning news. Just like that. I mean, the lady that was interviewing him was taken back a little bit, and she said, well, Mr. Bush, why don't you watch the morning news? Oh, my goodness. I hope you caught his expression if you saw it. She said, why don't you watch the morning news? He said, because I already know what it is. Now, there's a buzzword you need to listen for. You'll very seldom ever hear it. I know to listen for it because I sat in their board meetings. I ate across the dinner table from them at Prudhoe Bay. I know how to listen to some of their buzzwords. There's a buzzword you need to listen for. Every now and then you'll hear it. It's the word oil bourse. Oil bourse, B-O-I-S-E. Who is it that's making more than the oil companies are making? Did you know that Saudi Arabia cannot sell a barrel of oil to Shell Oil Company? Who do they sell it to? Watch now. Every oil-producing country in the world, they have no control over the price of oil. Saudi Arabia does not control the price. Venezuela, Russia, nobody controls the price of a barrel of oil as of 3 months ago. You watch this carefully. As of 3 months ago, something happened that wasn't supposed to. It was not in the plan. But let me finish up oil bourse. Who is it that's making more? You remember about 3 to 4 months ago, the IMF and the World Bank, they really made themselves look good. Now, you remember this because you'll pick out these buzzwords. They're so important. The IMF and the World Bank came out and said, we're going to forgive the loans of all the third world countries. You remember that? I see some head shaking. Oh, did it mean anything to you? Probably not. Did it mean anything to me? Oh, my goodness. I almost wanted to run around the house. I knew exactly what was happening. Why? You cannot forgive loans without somebody paying the loan. Who paid it? You did. And you did. And you did. Where'd you pay it? At the gas pump. Who is they? Watch now. Saudi Arabia. I'm just taking them. You could take Venezuela. You could take any country in the world. Take Mexico. It matters not. Any of these countries, any oil-producing country in the world, they sell their oil to the men who sit behind the computers in New York and London every day and tell the entire world what they're going to give them for a barrel of oil that day. It is not controlled by OPEC. It is not controlled by any oil-producing country of the world. They set the price for that day where they want it, whether it be $30 a barrel or $70 a barrel or $100 a barrel. They set the price. It has nothing to do with price and demand. It has only to do with those people who sit behind the computers in New York and London every day and tell the oil-producing countries of the world what they'll give them for oil on that given day, and they call themselves, but I'd like to tell you who they really are. They're none other than representatives of the World Bank and the IMF. And who is making, you know what it costs to get a barrel of oil out of the ground in Saudi Arabia? $5. On the north slope of Alaska at Prudhoe Bay, it costs $3 to get a barrel of oil out of the ground. I didn't say refine it. I didn't say transfer, take it from place to place, but to get it out of the ground. Then who is it that makes the exorbitant profit from $3 to $5 a barrel to $70 a barrel? It's the in-between man. Every product is this way. I care not what it may be. Take this platform right here. Some company produced it. They sold it to a wholesaler. The wholesaler sold it to a retailer. The retailer sold it to the person out there that buys it. There are in-between people in every product, matters not what it is. Now, take oil, it's the same way. Oil-producing country sells it to the oil bourse, whose representatives sit in New York and London. They tell them what they'll give them for that oil for that day. They in turn sell it to the oil companies. The oil companies sells it to the bulk plant. The bulk plant sells it to the service station. The service station sells it to you, and you buy it there. And who is making the exorbitant profit between the oil-producing country and the oil company themselves? You would have never known this had I not been in their board meetings. It's none other than the World Bank and the IMF, and you are paying off the debt of the third world countries. You paid it at the gas pump. It's a form of taxation. It's time that the American people rise up in arms and say we've had enough, and have an impeachment from the president down, because they're all oil men and they know it. When did it start? I'm going to give you the history. I hope you'll get my new DVD. It's an hour and 15 minutes long, everything I'm saying today and more. If you've never gotten it, please, for the sake of you and your posterity, I beg of you to get it today. It started in the days of President Carter. There was a man by the name of Mr. Henry Kissinger. He went to almost every oil-producing country in the world, and he said, I'd like to make you rich. But in order to do it, you must sign on the dotted line. They said, what do you want us to sign? He said, I'm asking two things of you. Number one, that you denominate all oil sales in American dollars. It was as sound as a dollar back in those days. They trusted the dollar. They didn't know what was in store for them. They didn't know we'd have $9 trillion national debt in 2006, but he did. And it was all planned. They knew exactly what they were doing. And he said, you must denominate all oil sales in American dollars. We will buy oil from you. We promise you, we will buy your... Watch this. This is so important. We will buy oil from you. You must denominate those oil sales in American dollars. They said, fine, we'll sign on the dotted line. What's the next item? He said, the next item is, you must take a certain percentage of everything that we buy oil from you with, and you must turn around and buy our national debt, our securities, our T-bills. Basically, they were buying the United States national debt, and at that point, they knew exactly what they were going to do in taking the debt to where it is today. You remember those two things? Denominate in dollars. Turn around and take a certain percentage and buy. You can take the rest of it and support your country. Do whatever you'd like to. Enjoy life. But you must take a certain percentage and buy our national debt. They said, we'll gladly sign on the dotted line. They didn't have the slightest idea what they were doing. There were two countries that wouldn't sign. You want to guess who they were? Out of all the oil countries that he went to, there were two countries would not sign. Number one was Iraq. Saddam. Oh, sure, there are a lot of people on the face of the earth that were as ruthless as Saddam. Sure, he killed people. Well, so did certain other rulers in the world too. Why don't we go after them? Saddam wouldn't sign on the dotted line. February through May of 1990. A man by the name of Abner Dethridge, write his name down. I could have never given this 6 months ago. He appeared with me on a radio talk show the other day over Republic Broadcasting. I never thought I'd get him to do it. Abner Dethridge was sent by the State Department of the United States of America to Iraq in February through May of 1990 in order to tell Saddam, invade Kuwait if you'd like. You remember prior to the last war, Kuwait and Iraq had been one and the same? And at the time that the world was divided up by the powers that be, it was divided, and Saddam was just going back after what had belonged to his country anyway prior to the division. And so our State Department sent Abner Dethridge to tell him, go ahead and invade if you want to. America will do nothing. It was a setup, planned in advance, because Bush needed an excuse to invade Saddam and destroy him. August the 1st. 1990, Iraq was invaded Kuwait. Immediately, our State Department and government begun to invade Iraq by a design, set-up plan. What was the second nation? Iran. Iran must be stopped and destroyed just like Saddam. Why? They wouldn't sign on the dotted line. It's not nuclear. The issues in Iran have nothing to do with nuclear. The issue in Iran is Iran would not sign on the dotted line and say we promise to denominate oil sales in American dollars, and as a result, we must stop them. After all, there are many countries in the world have nuclear. North Korea has it. Israel has it. On and on I could go. Soviet Union. Now we gave it to India when our president was over there recently. China, all the others. They have the bomb. Why don't we go after them? Why do we pick out little Iran who doesn't even have a bomb yet? Why? They wouldn't sign on the dotted line in the days, listen if you will, to Major General Smedley Butler. Some of you know who he is? Oh, what a book he wrote. Mr. President Eisenhower was asked one time, Mr. Eisenhower, you're very similar to Smedley Butler. President Eisenhower looked back at him and said, I wish I were half the man that Smedley Butler was. Major General Smedley Butler wrote a book, and in his book he states, war is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few, while at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. Then an unexpected problem arose. Started 3 months ago. March the 20th, write the date down. You probably, if you've heard me on Brother Butch Paul's show, you heard me mention it 3 months in advance. March the 20th, the first nation jumped out of the saddle. Now mind you, the American dollar has been used as the standard currency of the world for the transfer of oil up until that point. Let me go back to my original statement. The standard currency of the world today is oil. It is not the dollar. Neither is it the euro, nor is it the ruble. It is oil. And I'm going to touch your house and mine for the next few minutes. The first country to come along and say, we're not going to use the dollar anymore. Iran announced a number of months ago, we're going to set up our own bourse. That means bank. We're going to denominate in other currencies beside American dollars. Iran had to be stopped. So we hatched up, nuclear, stop Iran. They're going to bomb Israel. Had nothing to do with it. They don't even have a bomb yet. Be a long time before they get one. Why we want to go after little Iran? They were the first nation to jump out of the saddle and say we're not going to use the American dollar for the sale of oil any longer. They supply 5% of the world's oil supply. They're the fifth largest oil exporter in the world. Then another nation jumped out of the saddle. I don't agree with it, with Mr. Chavez. He's a communist. But I have to admire his spunk. Chavez in Venezuela said, no more American dollars. We're going to follow the plan of Iran. We're going to use something else for the sale of oil. And Chavez, 6% of America's oil supply. You want to know who Chavez and Venezuela is in America, and you buy their gas? It's called Citgo. Every time you pull into a Citgo station, you're buying from someone that Venezuela owns it. He said, we're not going to use the American dollar anymore. He jumped out of the saddle. Then Syria came along. I mean, this 90, folks, watch. This is so important. Within 90, am I going too long? I saw him do this to his watch. When people do that, I begin to wonder if I'm talking too long. Okay, thank you. At least I'd like to, yeah, good. All right, so Syria comes along, and Syria says, they're not an oil-producing country, but they handle a lot of international money. And Syria says, I'm not going to use the American dollar anymore. And then Nigeria ran Shell Oil Company out only about a month and a half ago. And they said, once we get our oil fields back, we aren't using the... Are you writing these nations down? I mean, this has happened in 90 days' time. Iran, Venezuela, Syria, Nigeria, then Norway came along. Oh, you say, well, what's Norway got to do with it? Supplies all of the Scandinavian countries with their oil. And Norway said, we're going to diversify. We are scared to death of the national debt of the United States of America. $9 trillion. We don't trust your T-bills and your securities anymore. That's the reason Iran jumped out of the saddle. They don't trust the New York bankers anymore. Why do you think Venezuela came along and did what they did? And Chavez, he said, I don't want your securities anymore. Your dollar is collapsing. Syria, Nigeria, Norway. Oh, then came along the United Arab Emirates. You think it was really ports? No. Come on, give me a break. Ports didn't have anything to do with it at all, except they wanted hard assets. The United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and that group over there, they said, we don't trust your dollar. $9 trillion national debt. We don't want your securities anymore. Give us hard assets or else. And our president tried to sweep it under the rug. And thank the Lord for a few congressmen that for one time stood up and bucked the president and made it known all over the country. Listen to me. Do you realize that you sitting right here today, do you realize that if you took to heart everything you've heard today and went back home as adamant as those congressmen that said, Mr. President, you aren't going to give Dubai our port facilities, do you realize that if you were as adamant as those people were about what you've heard today, that you could go back home and turn the world around? Sure you could. Less than 200 congressmen rose up and said, Mr. President, you aren't going to do it. And he had to back off after trying to sweep it under the rug. The United Arab Emirates said, we're not going to trust your securities anymore. And the day after the ports deal was denied them, you didn't see this in the national news. You would have known it if you had watched Wall Street careful enough. The day after they did not get the ports deal, they pulled out of the United States of America $13.5 billion in securities. And you wonder why the dollar is collapsing? You wonder why Wall Street in 3 weeks' time dropped 400 points? You wonder why gold is going up like it is and silver? If you knew what I knew, you wouldn't have the slightest doubting what's going to happen. Then, you ready for the next one? Bolivia. Bolivia said on May the 2nd of 2006, we aren't going to use the dollar anymore. Do you know what this means to you? Do you? What's going to happen when there's nobody to buy our debt? $9 trillion. It's been talked about by numbers of people here today. What's going to happen when there's... And then the nail that was driven into the coffin of the dollar. Are you ready for my prediction? May the 11th, 2006, Mr. Putin of Russia announced Russia is now going to establish a bourse. We will use the ruble as the reserve currency of oil for Russia's oil sale. Didn't mean a thing to you, did it? Meant everything to me. I immediately recognized the buzzword. Watch it. Iran, Venezuela, Syria, Nigeria, Norway, United Arab Emirates, Sweden, Bolivia, Russia, all in 90 days' time have said, we don't trust your dollar anymore. We don't trust your T-bills anymore. We don't trust your securities. Your $9 trillion national debt. On February the 24th, it was a Friday, a group of terrorists in Saudi Arabia tried to bomb an oil transfer facility. They missed by the distance of a football field. If they had succeeded, and oh, by the way, they said when they failed, they said, we'll be back. They will. Mark my words, they'll be back. As the Australian says, just one little hiccup at this point, and you are going to pay $6 a gallon at the gas pump and $100 a barrel for oil, and all they're doing is waiting for another Katrina or some hiccup in the world, and you will pay it at the gas pump, and it will go to none other than the IMF and the World Bank, and not because it cost any more to get it out of the ground, but because you will be paying a tax at the gas pump. And they will be relegating the lifestyle of we affluent Americans to the rate of a third world country. And you will pay not through internal revenue, you will pay the World Bank through the gas pump. If they had succeeded on Friday, February the 24th, and they said, we'll be back. If they had succeeded, on Monday morning, oil would have been over $100 a barrel, and gold would have been over $1,000 an ounce. Within 1 week of Iran's bourse being established on March the 20th, oil went up $5 a barrel, gold went up $20 an ounce, gasoline with the gas pump went up 25 cents, and interest rates went up 1/4 of a point within 1 week. Listen, Mr. Mashahara Kawai, he is the chairman of the Asian Development Bank. I'm going to read you a quote that he made in a statement just a few weeks ago. East Asian economies need to prepare for a possible collapse of the U.S. dollar. You know the only people that don't believe in the collapse of the dollar? Americans. Russia knows it. Venezuela knows it. Iran knows it. Syria knows it. The other countries of the world know it. The only people that have been able to be hoodwinked. The U.S. debt increased to $9 trillion just recently. You know what $9 trillion is? I have trouble even comprehending it. That's 28 Eiffel Towers built out of pure gold. 1 trillion. Let's just try to imagine something if we can here. 1,000 billion is a trillion, and $9 trillion in debt. Let's take 1 billion, not 1,000 trillion, not 1,000 billion, not even 1 trillion. Let's just take 1 billion and try to comprehend it for a moment if we can by using seconds. Tick, 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 tick. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. If we had 1 billion, not 1 trillion, and there's 1,000 billion and a trillion, and let's say 1 billion, it would... I've only got 10 minutes. I'm not even going to get halfway through. I got that many more notes. I'm not even getting started good. Well, you'll have to ask Brother Butch. I can't do it without his permission. Okay, 1 billion seconds. You'd go from today back to 1973 with 1 billion seconds. The dollar has lost 48%. I'm going to hurry. You'll just have to bear with me. I don't like to be a speaker that goes over time, not without permission. Brother Butch, that's up to you. The dollar has lost 48% of its value. There were 2,000 bankruptcies every day in the United States of America now. What are we getting to? Watch. $10 trillion. This administration, it'll chalk up $10 trillion before they get through. 200 years it took us to chalk up $1 trillion. In the past 18 months, we have chalked up another entire $1 trillion. $704 gold. I got to go in a hurry here. The federal government is currently spending 20.8 cents out of every $1 the economy generates. The M3 money supply, they didn't print it after March the 23rd. Oh, I got to go through these notes. I'm sorry. I'll just have to get going here. China, in 2001, we had $83 billion in a trade surplus. 2002, 103 billion. 2003, 124. 2004, 162. 2005, 201. Oh my, China, one of their officials recently said, China can stop buying dollar-denominated bonds. You think that won't cause us trouble? The U.S. is forced to spend to import 400,000 gallons of gasoline a day from other countries. The U.S. had, in 1981, 321 refineries. Today we only have 149. That means they're running 24 hours a day with no time down for maintenance. I'll have to skip this one altogether. I'm coming down to some... I'm going to solutions. Invite me back some other time and I'll give you the rest of it. As Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. I must go to solutions. Whenever I give a message like this, the first thing that people say is anything we can do about it? Yes, you can. I want you to put a smile on your face. A whole lot of hope down in your heart. My son Daniel and I, night before last, arrived at home at midnight. We had been in Cancun, Mexico for a week. The people that went to the conference in Cancun had paid over $7,000 to hear 30 speakers from around the world. I was invited as one of those speakers. I had to fly back from Cancun, spent 1 4-hour night at home, and fly in here on yesterday in order to be at this convention or this conference because I wanted to be here to tell you there is hope. We had over 700 people that came from 10 countries of the world. Some of them were ambassadors. They even had people who translated in languages so that the people had on earphones, and they had come and paid over $7,000 to spend 8 days to hear nothing about except what they could do about it. Tell me the world's not waking up? They are waking up. Take heart. People are, for the first time since the middle 80s, when I saw an awakening, it is happening today. And I just wanted you to know that because I want you to realize that people are saying we've had enough and we're going to do something about it. And that's the reason you're here today and the reason these other things are happening. There is an awakening out there now. What is the solution? Everything worthwhile in life is spiritual. The first solution is get right with Jesus Christ. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, kindness, all spiritual gifts. Everything worthwhile in life is spiritual. A man the other day in one of these conventions, it was a secular convention. You know, most of you folks, I consider you to probably be born-again Christians anyway. But I can't go to many secular conventions such as I was at in Cancun, where there were people from all over the world that would laugh at you if you called yourself a Christian. And I got up before the audience, I won't give you the number of people that were there. I'm not even supposed to. I got up before the audience and I said, the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses you from all sins. And the first way to get right in light of what's happening in the world is know Jesus Christ is your Savior. And I got a standing ovation. I'll say it anywhere. And if I can't say it, I won't go. And the first thing you do is get right with the Lord. And as one man said to me the other day, he said, Chaplain Williams, I can't accept this God stuff. He said, if I can't see it, I can't believe it. I said, do you love your wife? He said, well, sure I do. I said, how do you know? Can you see it? The first place is John chapter 8, verse 32. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. I'm going to quote it incorrectly. You never quote the Bible wrong unless you tell people you're going to. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will scare you to death. That isn't what it says. The truth will set you free. Peter Jacobs. He's a multimillionaire from Australia. He spoke at a church in Scottsdale, Arizona just recently. He's a gold dealer, one of the top in the world. Peter Jacobs said, gold is going to $1,000 an ounce in the immediate. This is not Lindsey Williams saying this. He said it is possibly going to $2,000 before you know it. Listen to their words, their buzzwords. I'd like to read you one. And then I'll stay within my extra 15 minutes. The Washington Times. There was a meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, of some of the wealthiest men in the world. And when they left the meeting, the the Washington Times put in the following article. He said the price of crude oil could reach $131 a barrel. Why didn't they say $130 a barrel? Right. Why didn't they say 120? Why, when they came out of that meeting in Geneva, Switzerland, did they say 131? Because that's exactly where it's going. And you know what that denominates to at the gas pump? $6 a gallon. Now, I'll make my offer and read you one little article here and quit. On my table right here to the side, my son's sitting over there. Yeah, I have a son 12 years of age. He's the joy of my life. Goes with me everywhere I go. People ask me to go somewhere to speak. I say, buy 2 airline tickets. I'd like to make you an offer. Would you like 6 hours of what I've tried to put into an hour and 20 minutes? I mean, I tell so much more than what I've said here, there's no comparison. You know that cell phones play a part of this? Did you know that? Did you have the slightest idea that vaccinations play a part of the total picture? Oh, you say, did you hear that? You don't know half of what I heard. But I try to tell the world, I'd like to have you get 6 hours of DVDs. 6 hours of DVD viewing and a copy of my book, The Energy Non Crisis, and also a CD. Here's what I'm going to do for this conference. If you will purchase 4 sets, my 4-set DVD, I will give you 2 DVDs as a gift. Give them to you, no charge. Why? Oh, by the way, my DVDs are not copywritten. Would you please take them and copy them? Everywhere you can. Give them out every place you can. Put them on public access TV. Give them to your neighbors. Have a meeting in your home. Please, let you purchase the 4, and I will give you 2. One of them is an economic hitman Oh, you'll never see anything like this. There's no place on the face of this earth that you'll get this except on my DVD, because I'm the only one he ever gave an interview to after he retired from helping the World Bank set up all of the monetary system with these oil-producing countries. I was put in touch with him. He dared to give me an over-hour interview. He gives the trust. He tells the banks. He gives the intricate, minute details of how it all works. And it's on a 1 hour and 7 minute DVD. One man called me the other day. He said, I've just watched it for the 5th time. I'm sitting here glued to it. You've got to see what the farmers said. Torn from the Land is a compelling story of what happened to the family farm. And you think there's going to be food in our grocery stores a year and a half from now when the farmers can't afford to farm their crops because the price of diesel fuel is too much? Please, it's a part of that 6 hours. It's a 1 hour DVD of what's happening to the family farm. I beg of you, get my 4 sets. I will give you 2 DVDs. I'll give you a copy of my book, The Energy Non-Crisis. Looking for a job? Joe Smith started the day early, having set his alarm clock made in Japan for 6 a.m., while his coffee pot made in China was perking. He shaved with his electric razor made in Hong Kong. He put on a dress shirt made in Sri Lanka, designer jeans made in Singapore, and tennis shoes made in Korea. After cooking his breakfast with his new electric skillet made in India, he sat down with his calculator made in Mexico to see how much he could spend today. After setting his watch made in Taiwan to the radio made in India, he got in his car made in Germany, filled it with gas from Saudi Arabia, and continued his search for a good-paying American job. At the end of the year, end of another discouraging and fruitless day, checking his computer made in Malaysia, Joe decided to relax for a while. He put on his sandals made in Brazil, poured himself a glass of wine made in France, and turned on his TV made in Indonesia, and then wondered why he couldn't find a good-paying job in America. On the North Slope of Alaska is enough oil, the largest pool on the face of the earth. The president knows about it, and so does the vice president. If it were released to the refineries of America, gasoline within 1 year's time could be less than $1.50 a gallon. But they cannot do it. They will never open ANWR. Why? Because if they did, those nations that signed in the days of Mr. Henry Kissinger would not be obligated to buy our national debt. They, in turn, would jump saddle, as did Iran and other countries, and the American dollar would collapse immediately. It's a two-edged sword. I don't know how a president sleeps at night. It will happen eventually because so many nations are jumping ship. But it will not happen under this administration because he does not want it to happen in his term of office. We are in a state such as America has never been. It can be turned around. There is no lack of oil. There's only a lack of honesty in Washington, D.C.